I think governments are running scared from cryptocurrencies at the
Yeah.
moment because you lose control of your monetary policy.
Yeah.
And so it is inevitable that we are going to see regulatory uh,
Mhm.
pressure because governments are losing their quote unquote financial sovereignty
Yeah.
based on the rise of this and the fact that you can transact a lot of it. And so I
Mhm.
think we're in for a bit of a rocky
Mhm.
road in that. I think they are inevitable.
Yeah.
And it's what I personally love about them is that it's a great equalizer across, and to not have to do
Mhm.
translation when I'm in France or in Estonia or
Yeah.
the US or Denmark or all these places that have different currencies. Um, like being able to standardize on that again
Mhm.
makes the world more connected.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of 401 Access Tonight. Joe Carson, your host of the episode today. And I am the Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO here at Thycotic Centrify. And I'm really excited about today's episode. I've got a very special guest, a longtime friend, and used to work for many years ago. So, Art, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do? And then we'll get kind of into the show from there.
Absolutely, Joe. It's great to see you again. So, hello everyone. My name is Art Gilliland. I am the CEO now of Thycotic Centrify. Quick background is I've been in the industry now for almost 25 years or so. Worked across probably almost every domain except for physical security, unless you count my time as a bouncer in college. But I'm looking forward to having a conversation. Joe, it's really good to see you again.
Likewise. It's been a few years. I think the last time we saw each other, probably during a Black Hat or RSA event. I think it was
I think it might
one.
have been
One
a
of
decade ago or something like that. Uh,
probably around. I think actually it was around 2013 or 2014,
yeah,
around that
I
time.
think
So
so.
it's been quite some time. But today's episode, I'm really excited because a lot's happened this year, and
Yep.
one of the things I like to do is just to kind of a review and what we've been seeing in the industry, what's been happening in the threat landscape, what types of things are happening around in cybersecurity, and then we can towards the end we'll move into a little bit more about predictions because I really like to think about what's happening in the future. What do we need to think about? What threats are increasing? What's the challenges for organizations? So towards kind of the second half, we'll look for more around the prediction side of things for 2022. So welcome again that be on the show. So one of the things for me this year, of course, it's been a continuous of the pandemic. It's been that extension, and we're really seeing, the hybrid workforce. We're seeing organizations still having many employees working remotely. Some are trying to get the employees to come back in the office and struggling to get them to at least persuade them. What things have you seen, from the hybrid workforce? What areas of organizations been at risk, and what things, what's changed the environment for basically the working environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak as a CEO of a company that's going through a lot of change. Obviously, we experienced not only the COVID and all the challenges that you have to do there, but also we created a merger essentially of two like-sized
Mhm.
companies and brought them together in sort of the April timeframe this last year. During all of this pandemic. And I think one of the interesting or really complicated things as you go through that transition is, and we hear a lot about it in the news, is this sort of great resignation of October that we're supposed to be experiencing. And I think part of the challenge for a lot of companies is you're seeing a lot of movement, a lot of
Mhm.
labor movement. You're seeing a lot of people move, and the challenge that we have is that you can't rebuild, it's hard to rebuild the culture that was there before,
Mhm.
because even if you, let's say you lose 10 people and you hire 20, there's a bunch of new energy and a bunch of new excitement that's joining the company. But the only thing that the team remembers is those 10 that left because they knew them already.
Yeah.
And so that cultural transition, I think, is making it very difficult because we don't see each other. We don't hang out by the lunch station. We don't get to interact. And so even though there's a lot of new excitement, a lot of
Mhm.
new people joining the companies, um, the memory is only of the people that left. And so it's hard to sort of rebuild in this remote world. And I think the reality is that we are going to be remote
Yeah.
for a long time. I'm in the office today. I like being in the office, but I only want to be in the office 2-3 days a week. I'm not going to be here
Hmm.
every day. And I think that's just going to be the norm as we go forward. And we're just going to have to figure out how to manage through that.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've seen is, even where people's investing, in their personal side of things, they're actually investing in home offices. They're
Yeah.
investing in making their home a much more enjoyable place to work. Because I mean, I've been working remotely for 15 years now. It's been a long
You were an
time.
early adopter.
I was already a doctor.
Yeah.
And one thing I find was that, for me to switch, during that time where, not being in the office, because I was rarely in the office in the first place,
Yeah.
I was always on the road. So for me, the biggest impact was not seeing my colleagues
Yeah.
in face to face, not traveling to events, not doing speaking engagements. For me, that was a big change.
Yeah.
But one thing is definitely is working from home in a pandemic. It's not just you working from home. It's everybody. It's your family. The kids are stuck at
Yeah.
home, and that becomes it's more that you're finding that place in your home to work that is quiet. Even for
Yeah.
myself, even doing things like the podcasts and webinars, and
Right.
even moving to speaking at digital events, which has interestingly, where I used to maybe do about 40 in-person events per year, now I'm doing about 70 to 80 digital events per year because
Yeah.
there's none of that travel time. So for you, I mean, how has it impacted you having to work from home, also with kids and family and everyone around?
Yeah, I mean,
How has
look,
that
it's
changed?
yeah. I think uh, I think there's positives and negatives, right? So I
Mhm.
think the definitely the positive is I am available and around, and so my dog is super happy, and and I think there's
Mhm.
some goodness there. I think you know a lot of us deal with the fact that working from home. A lot of people just hear home; they don't hear the
Mhm.
working part of it, and so there's a lot of interrupts that happen.
Yeah.
But that's true at the office too, and so you deal with that. I mean, I think it's good now
Mhm.
that my kids are back in school and things are sort of returning to somewhat normal
Mhm.
in sort of the day to day. But to be fair, I enjoy the remote work also. I think
Yeah.
the ability to be efficient and see customers all over the world in one day.
Yeah.
Because if I was going to see customers in Singapore, I'd have to fly to Singapore
Mhm.
to see them, to interact with them, just because there wasn't a global comfort with being on video.
Yeah.
And look, if there's an upside, and I'm sure we'll be able to highlight quite a few upsides from the terribleness of the
Mhm.
pandemic, it's that this transition has enabled us to just be way more effective
Yeah.
at building relationships and interacting and conducting business remotely,
Mhm.
which has again made the world a little smaller and a little closer for people like myself that used to have to fly all over.
Yeah.
And so now I can have a meeting in Singapore, I can meeting in London, and I can have a meeting in New York, and I can be home for dinner. And I think
Absolutely.
that's just good and healthy.
And it's even for me who travel a lot, and like yourself, trying to stay healthy while traveling was also challenging.
Yeah,
I
I'm not
really
sure COVID has made me healthier. I think I've been drinking and eating more.
Depends. For some, it's been good. Maybe
Yeah,
for others.
exactly.
But the one thing I did find challenging as well, doing these digital events though, is that when you were traveling, you would be in the same time zone as the person you're meeting, and you would get over the struggle basically of the time difference and jet lag.
Yeah,
But for now, is that I would be attending, for example, Black Hat recently, and I
yeah,
would have to be spending 10 p.m. till 3 in the morning to attend those events if you're attending live sessions. So there's those some
yeah. That's not
pros and
awesome.
cons. So
That's definitely not awesome. And look, I think
yeah,
there's also just not being able to shake people's hand. I mean, we
yeah,
are a social being as well, and so even if you're an introvert, it's nice to actually interact with some people every now and then. And so I think there's some level of excitement
mhm,
about being able to start at meet in person. I mean, I've over the last couple months, I've started traveling more to see customers,
mhm,
and customers are more comfortable inviting you
yeah,
into their offices. And that's been amazing. I mean, it's been great,
yeah.
and like the level of excitement to
What's
have a business meeting is really gone through the roof.
what's
Um,
been yeah, what's been interesting though is some of the events I've attended recently. So absolutely, even in EU, we've been having much
yeah,
more freedom of movement, and
yeah, of course.
going to events has been interesting because you've got now different people at events who's don't touch me, stay 2 meters apart. You've
Yeah.
got those who are like, we'll do fist pumps, or
Yeah.
was it, oh, we'll just was it kick each other in the foot.
There's definitely an awkwardness in the introduction. It's like, okay, are we shaking hands? Are we fist bumping? And so you're doing a lot of this kind of, I don't know what to
Yeah, you
do.
don't. Your hands.
You don't
One
really
is,
know what to do.
I've had situations where you're grabbing someone's fist when they're going to fist bump. And
Yeah, of
awkward,
course.
awkward moments. But absolutely, I think one thing though is that we've seen this. I think working remotely and being more flexible is something we've been doing for a long time. And I really,
Yeah,
there's a great book that I read years ago, which was a guy called Ed McCormick, who really seen that we're kind of moving to this direction anyway. And we've
yeah,
seen, from the times of mobility to greater connectivity to BYOD, and I even call it, bring your own office now. Is that employee? I mean, most employees have probably never, who's just changed positions in the past year or a little bit longer, have never been to the office. They've never been to. They probably haven't even
right.
seen their colleagues.
Well, we did
Um,
this whole deal, and I never met the opposing team
yeah.
face to face. I mean, we were on video the entire time, and we did the $1.3 billion acquisition of Thycotic,
Mhm.
and the
Yes.
reality is, Jim Legg, who is the CEO of that company, and I never met. We didn't actually meet until like almost 3 months ago, 2 months ago,
That's impressive.
face
That
to face.
how we can do business today.
It is kind of interesting. I mean, look, that's part of the transition that we're working through.
Yeah, and also, a lot of this introduces new threat landscape. A lot of organizations in the past,
Yeah,
even the past 12 months have
right.
seen, the challenges of supply chains and the risks. Where we're seeing even till today, there's major supply chain challenges and either shortages of electronics and chips.
Yeah,
We've also seen challenges of logistics and moving things around. We've seen attackers take advantage of supply chains as well, even bringing some countries into basically some type of chaos, whether it being shortage of fuel or shortage
yeah,
of goods in the shop. What challenges do you see? What risks are organizations facing as a result of the change in the environment?
yeah. I mean, it's. I think the biggest challenge we've had is just the lack of real ability to
Mm.
understand if the people that are logging in and accessing the things you need to are the right people, and also the security of
Mhm.
this of the location where they're working.
Yeah.
I mean, you can. It's not like it was perfect before, but at least it was somewhat understood and
Mhm.
controlled. When you're in the office connecting, there's a way to sort of correlate: should this person have access to these sensitive systems? And literally
Mhm.
overnight, over almost like a couple weeks time, companies were having to figure out how to open their environments to the
Mhm.
outside world and let people log in. And so I think that has just it's
Mhm.
opened up the aperture for avenues for the adversary to attack us. And so we've had to become a lot smarter at authentication of the
Mhm.
people, and as they come in, what authorization should they have, what access should they have. I think companies have had to figure out how to control sort of the blast radiuses
Yeah.
internally. And so, okay, this person might have gotten in, they might want to do bad stuff, but how do I at least contain the damage into
Mhm.
certain areas? And some companies have accelerated that investment and that skill set significantly, and some of them have not. And I think that complexity that's been
Mhm.
added to the environments just makes it harder. Um, and I think
Absolutely.
that would probably be the biggest thing that I've seen is just the added complexity, the increase of the number of connections from the outside world, the
Mhm.
the fact that workers are literally exploding into other locations, and so even trying to figure out where your workers are coming from has become more complicated, especially for the super large global
Mhm.
enterprises now,
Absolutely.
whose people are all working from home.
Yeah.
Um, and then you have these home environments. Now, of course, some of us have the luxury of having, a much more secure home
Mhm.
environment and, high bandwidth and all of those other things, but that's not true globally.
Yep.
And so,
Yeah. We
your
did.
kids
We
are
did
on the
a
network. There's a bunch of stuff going on in your house that that corporations just would not allow.
Yeah,
Uh,
we did some research late last year. So
yeah,
every year we do some basically CISO research,
yeah,
and last year was about looking at from an employee perspective, and it was always the balance between productivity and security. It was really interesting that their fear, employees working remotely, was actually the connectivity and bandwidth problems, because as you say, not everyone has the same internet speeds. If you're in, especially in a rural location, you
Yeah.
might have really, how many times have somebody had to, during a video call, turn off the video because it was disrupting the actually audio feed. So we're starting to see some of the challenges, and also employees, they're at more risk as well, because they want to get their job done. They're measured on how well they do their job, not how secure they are, but how well they do the job.
Yeah.
And during that research, we found that employees were willing to take risks to get the job done. And if that
Yeah.
meant sharing a password over a basically unsecured channel, like such as social media or even email
Yeah.
or some type of messaging tool, they were willing to do that in order to make sure that somebody could access the application to get the job done.
Yeah.
And organizations no longer have that solid visibility. If employees were doing that in the office, they could see that happening, but they're
Yeah.
not.
No question.
Yeah, I was called. We talk about this is that really what now organizations, their corporate networks is the public internet. It's basically that's the means of communication. That's where all the internet communications is happening. That's where employees are working. And now you have to change the way you do security. You can't rely on that perimeter firewalls managed network anymore. We have to move to a way that what can we do? And this is where I really think that organizations who, in the past year, they've accelerated their move to cloud, to kind of manage this hybrid
Oh,
workforce and
definitely.
working remotely. But at the same time, this has opened up a major challenge, because now they've got all these different types of complexities and less visibility into those complexities.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
it's really
there's the
exposed a lot of
behavioral
companies.
complexity that you're talking about, and then there's
Yep,
just the connection and the connectivity and the fact that their systems are being accessed from everywhere.
absolutely.
And I think 2 years in now, I think companies have bought and built and tried to create more of that infrastructure, but over the last year and a
Hmm.
half, they were all scrambling to try to do it. So
Yep.
it's I think that's been that's definitely been disruptive, and you
Hmm.
see more of that challenge. I
Absolutely.
think the upside for it is just the level of security awareness that has
Hmm.
gone into the depths. And at the highest end of most sophisticated enterprises, they've been paying attention to this for a long time
Yep.
because they have the resources to
Hmm.
have the luxury to do that. I think we've seen more in the more recent past is that the sort of that mid market, that upper
Hmm.
mid market of the company sizes have just invested a lot more of their energy and their IQ into, okay, how do I operate in this new world where
Hmm.
digitally or otherwise I might be more vulnerable. And I think that's been a big obviously a big uplift to the security vendor industry, but
Hmm.
also just I think it's better for society if the companies are taking it more seriously.
Absolutely. And this kind of takes me to one of the areas I've seen, and is that I always look at, well, what do you, as you are doing that digital transformation, you're accelerating to cloud. And I've seen a lot of organizations as well where they've simply opened up, to keep their employees productive. They've opened up RDP to the public internet, and still only being protected with a simple password to allow accountants and other employees to do work.
Yeah, not
And
awesome.
it's not, and I've seen, from a result of it, I've seen companies become victim of ransomware. And we've seen,
Yeah,
in the past couple of years, cyber criminals, they're really specializing. They're not trying to be, the jack of all trades. They're not trying to do everything. What they're saying is, I'm going to specialize, and if I'm a specialize in a crypto, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to make it an affiliate program, just like a
yeah,
channel, and I'm going to give it to
sell
people.
it.
And that's what we saw recently with the Revo criminal gang, basically, where we're seeing some of their affiliates being arrested
Yeah.
through coordinated police efforts. So, how much of the specialization are we going to continue seeing?
Yeah,
What's.
I mean, look, it's there's so much money being made
Mhm,
now in that part of the world. I mean, as our lives went digital, all of our sort
mhm,
of financial also elements went digital, and so crime just followed it.
yep,
And I think what we're seeing is that it's a marketplace.
mhm,
And so, as an entity, as a company, we're kind of fighting
mhm,
against market forces here. And so, yeah, I'll hire. Let's say we hire 5 to 10 people
mhm,
in a company our size. We're about 1,000 employees. We probably have about that many working on our security infrastructure. Um, the reality is my 10 folks cannot compete against a marketplace where every single step of the attack chain is being specialized. And
Yeah.
so literally my person who's trying to protect us is competing against someone who's the best in the world at that one thing.
Yes.
And they're monetizing that
Hmm.
skill set as they should. I mean,
Yeah.
these, and you see some vertically integrated, some adversaries, typically government,
Hmm.
entities or the true cyber criminal gangs. But in general, it's a marketplace, and even like you see it even show up in some of the nation
Hmm.
state sponsored attacks. They're using just off the shelf tools to gain
Yeah.
access or do research or whatever step they want to augment in their own attack chain.
Absolutely.
And that,
Even nation states, they're starting. They use mercenaries,
of course,
cyber
they do.
mercenaries.
I
So
mean, that
it's
was true in like the spy world, and now it's true in the cyber spy world,
yeah.
right?
So
They're
we,
just going to
we will
outsource
let you carry out your criminal activity and
exactly.
profit from it as long as you do some work for us. As
Right.
long as you give us some favors back, and it also
And
keeps that attribution side of things more difficult. How can you
it
attribute
makes it
to
really
people who?
hard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it makes it really
so.
hard.
And one of the things as well, just in addition to that, I read a fantastic article recently. As we talk about the supply chain, we've got
Yeah,
those who specialize in creating the crypto, those who specialize in gaining the access and selling the access. You've got those
yeah,
who even help desk. So, we will give
right.
you the help desk to help communicate with the victims, because you may not be in the same language, you may not be in
Yeah,
the same time zone.
yeah,
So we'll facilitate that for you. So there's this whole production line of criminal activities and expertise, such as the criminal marketplace. The one I recently read, which was really interesting, which was an article from Joseph Cox on Vice and Motherboard, and he introduced basically a new element where basically, because not all criminals may not be native English speakers,
that's right.
and one of the best ways to gain access to organizations is through social engineering. And what you're now starting to see is basically social engineering through basically voice bots. So where we've had DDoS bots, we've had different types of bots, whether it being denial of service, whether it being access bots or deployment. We're now seeing voice bots, which are providing basically automated voice
Automated
to do
translation or being able to, yeah, so they can access more of the world.
absolutely. And
Yeah,
there is a service you can go and buy it online. You can enter your own text in. And the thing is that the challenge is that in the industry, organizations have went that way to do their basically automation. So for people to receive a social engineering voice bot, it's
yeah,
not uncommon for them to get something, in a traditional kind of organization, and it's so authentic sounding. These things are
yeah,
really putting the fear
for
that
sure.
your account has been compromised. Make sure that to verify, to stop this financial transaction from happening.
Yeah,
Please basically enter one, put in your second factor authentication PIN, and we'll prevent that from transaction from happening. But in the background, what they're really doing is stealing their 2FA code.
really. Yeah,
So,
it's. I mean, look, it's the social engineering has
mhm,
just become more extreme as it's professionalized, right?
yeah,
They're just better and better at it. I mean, I think one of the things that I find interesting about this is obviously there's a lot of discussions around,
mhm,
what are the major economies going to do about it? How do we create a treaty with Russia and China
yeah,
and others? And that may be possible. I'm somewhat skeptical because we've been spying on each other for centuries, and I think that's going to continue.
mhm,
Um, but I think the thing that cyber has done is it kind of levels the geopolitical
yeah,
landscape a little more, because it used to be that only wealthy companies had the ability to invest in the sort of makings of war.
mhm,
But now you don't have that. You don't have that same hurdle. You don't have to spend billions and billions of dollars to become effective a cyber force.
mhm,
And so I think it's going to change sort of the geopolitical landscape and give, I would say, poorer countries that may
mhm,
or may not have the same heft in negotiating in the other way, just a lot more, a lot larger seat at the table. And so
absolutely.
it's going to be an interesting. It just changes the dynamics, right? And
Yeah,
so even if we can agree with China and Russia and others around sort of what the rules of cyber are going to be, it doesn't mean we're going to be able to convince North Korea or convince
Mhm.
Iran or convince Turkey or African countries that may invest further in this capability what they should or shouldn't do in the cyberscape as they try to fight for resources. And so it's going to be, I think it's going to make the world that we
Mhm.
engage in just a lot more diverse in how we think about trying to do treaties and trying to do cybercrime fighting
Mhm.
and managing cyber criminals.
Absolutely, and that's kind of one of the things I'm always worried about is that we've seen so much uptake in those cyber mercenaries and cyber organized crime who are attacking from countries
Yeah,
where there's no, let's say, legal boundaries. There's no basically collaboration or transparency.
yeah,
And what we started seeing is for countries to try and defend themselves, they're now investing in cyber offensive capabilities.
yeah.
And this is where you start getting into, well, who is it okay to attack back? When is it okay to do offensive attacking? And for me, it's always a concern. And we've seen a lot of countries, and it's
Right.
clear that one is no country can do this alone. It must be a collaborative, working together, transparent, effort to hold countries who are providing safe havens for cyber criminals to make sure that there's less places for them to operate from. So what we're seeing around regulations or new compliances that are really trying to move this direction. We've seen a lot of things like EU GDPR. We've seen Cyber Essentials. We've seen
Right.
NIST. We've seen the recent executive order from the administration in the US really starting to take a kind of hard line against cyber attacks.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's kind of stages that they're going through.
Mhm.
One is they're pushing that responsibility on us as enterprises to take it seriously and invest, and the
Mhm.
risk trade off that we would have taken before, they're just essentially making it cost more if we don't follow through on our duty. And so there's some element of increasing the bar.
Mhm.
I've never been a huge fan of regulation, primarily because it's just a bar, and people think
Yep.
once they're there, they're safe. Like I had PCI or I had GDPR, and the reality is it essentially is the low bar in
Yep.
security, and so you've reached that. And if you think you're done at that point, I think it's a fallacy.
Yep. It's a
And so you
checkpoint
have to sort of
measurement of
aspire.
time.
It's just a point of measurement, and
Yeah.
it definitely brings the whole industry up a bit, but it's still a low bar.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like taking one measurement of the temperature per year and then trying to predict, what
yeah,
the weather's going to be like all year round.
exactly.
What clothing should you wear in winter if you're taking a temperature reading in the summer? It's going to be
Right.
different.
So I think it's positive, and
Mm,
we need to do that. But I also think there does need to be more government specific action to
yeah.
protect our environments, protect the infrastructure.
Hmm.
I mean, if a foreign country blew up a oil refinery,
Yeah.
like physically blew up an oil refinery, planes would be flying and bombs would be dropping. But when you blow up, global transit, like
Hmm.
the cybercrime that took down Merck
Hmm.
or Maersk, sorry,
Yeah.
Maersk,
Maersk. Yeah.
uh, it, what happened? Like,
Hmm.
and so there's
Nothing for months.
nothing, and candidly, did the countries that were
Mhm.
dependent on that sort of react in an aggressive manner back? I think it's hard to tell,
Yeah.
and I think that lack of consequence makes it very
Hmm.
difficult to deter the behavior.
Yeah.
Which is why I think cybercrime is so rampant. Also, is
Hmm.
if you can sit in your basement and in your PJs and make
Yeah.
$500,000 in 10 minutes, and the risk of having somebody bust down
Hmm.
the door is minimal. I think that it just creates incentive, in particular in some of the countries that don't have the economic opportunities
Hmm.
that others might have. I mean, that it's almost unavoidable.
Yeah. And so I just want to kind of, I want to move into a little bit more of the prediction side of things. So,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
one of the things, we've talked a bit about identity and there's organizations struggling with the whole BYOD side of things. And one
Yep.
thing that I've seen is I always try to look at What things do you still have control of? What are the artifacts or the assets and resources? As more employees are using their home networks, using their BYOD devices, they might get an allowance to buy a device, but you may struggle to manage it, or you might be partially managing it. So for me, when I really look at this, and it kind of brings me back to even Estonia, because in Estonia, basically from the ground up, we built a society around a digital identity. Digital
Yeah.
identity is the common piece that basically brings all of society here together. It's how we basically do voting. It's how we pay taxes. It's how
Yeah.
we use public transportation to loyalty cards. It's all tied to that. So for me, identity is where organizations still have control of, whether it's on-premise, cloud, BYOD, SaaS,
Yeah.
developers, third-party contractors, full-time employees. And then the security control is the access to that. So for me, I really see identity as being the new perimeters. The perimeter we still can control, and access is where you apply the security controls to.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts around identity being that perimeter and security being
Yeah,
the
I mean,
access?
it's we're hearkening back to the Jericho
Yeah,
Forum, obviously.
yeah, sure, go on.
This
Yes.
the firewall is dead. Long live the firewall. Look, I am a believer.
Mhm,
When I started looking at what spaces in security that I
mhm,
wanted to work in next, I think there are two that I think are super interesting for me
mhm,
personally. One of them is in identity security, and the other is information security. So almost
mhm.
like DLP-V2, if you
Yeah.
will. And I think the reason that I think those are the most interesting personally is as more and more of our companies and our customers' infrastructure goes
Mhm,
into cloud and or SaaS, we are essentially operating our entire business in someone else's infrastructure.
Yep.
And so if you look at Thycotic Centrify, for example, our front end CRM system is Salesforce, our
Mhm,
financial ERP system is NetSuite, our HR system is Workday. And so almost all of my core business processes are
mhm,
operating in someone else's infrastructure, in someone else's application. And the only things that are mine, quote unquote, in that
mhm,
are my users, whether those users are people or machines,
mhm.
and my information that's there.
Yep.
And so the place where I am going to be able to enforce policy, my own policy, I have to accept their policies, but where
Mhm,
I'm going to be able to enforce my own policies are on who my users are and what they have access and authorization
yep.
to see and do, and then the information and what is allowed to happen to it.
Yep.
And so I am a strong buyer of that.
Mhm,
Whether that's going to be the tipping point next year or over the next sort of 5 years, I think that horizon is coming to all companies
mhm,
over time. And look, we're going to be in a hybrid world where there'll be some infrastructure on premise and some in the cloud, and we're going to find some equilibrium behind that just because of efficiencies and cost and other things.
mhm,
But the likelihood that more and more of our policy enforcement is moving towards your users and what they should have rights to do
mhm.
is inevitable.
Yeah.
And so I am a huge believer in that. It doesn't mean that firewalls will completely disappear, but their
The
functionality will
value that they
dramatically
provide will
change.
change.
And
Yeah,
the
the
value
value.
that
Yeah.
they provide, even the value they provide now,
Mhm,
is de minimis
yeah.
because of how many connections need to come in.
It's the same
It's
same with VPNs. We've had this big discussion. People have been saying VPNs are dead, and I'm like, no, the use case is different. It's no longer about giving you access to a
yeah.
specific network. It's about providing privacy to the communications that you have as well. It's about providing some type of control over basically the flow of data. So I think we have to change and look at that
Yeah.
the values might be slightly different, and the use case is becoming different as well,
Yeah, I
to
mean,
what they
I think
were
that's right.
originally.
And you have to be able to watch that data. You
Yeah.
still need a place to enforce it, but that
Mhm.
place has to be separate from the location
Yeah.
that you sit at, right? And so, is it a new kind of gateway
Mhm.
or policy enforcement location? Because you used to have to enforce it on the endpoint. You still have to
Mhm.
have those physical locations. That sometimes that physical
Yep.
location is just sitting in Amazon with somebody else's
Yeah,
application.
it's
Um,
someone else's hardware. You're just renting the compute
it's
power.
totally that, and someone else's application, whether it's
Yeah,
a CASB or a proxy. I think it's unlikely to be a
yeah.
firewall, but but architecturally, it'll
Yeah.
probably be one of those
That was
other
an
two.
interesting one here in Estonia because we had that challenge post 2007,
Of
where it ended
course.
up becoming the data embassy became the new concept because Estonia didn't want their sovereign data of the citizens being in someone else's geographical location, and that word
Yeah.
became the data embassy. What's your thoughts on you talked about the Jericho Forum, and I've had tons of about decentralized identity and all of those things,
Yeah.
and we've had in the past with the from the Jericho Forum, we've had a lot of discussion around things like you bring your own identity. The
Yeah.
organization will provide you entitlement to the identity you bring, and it's a bit like what we're seeing today, where application identities and passwords you'll have single sign-on, and then that
Yep.
will be basically entitled, and then all the organization provides basically is authorization and access.
Yeah.
To specific data. Your thoughts around kind of bring your own identity or
Yeah, I
your
mean,
share
look,
economy identity?
I love the
Mm,
concept of it.
yeah,
I love the idea of it. I think the challenge is who's going to own it,
yeah.
right? And I think you see a battle for it today in the enterprise, and actually Microsoft, a long time ago, if you
Mhm.
remember, almost a decade ago, they came out with Passport.
Yeah. Yes.
And what that really
Mhm,
was, in my opinion, was an attempt to create individual identities that then you could federate. You could
mhm.
use them. You could bring your own, and you could have a passport.
Yeah.
And you see Facebook and Google and others that have sort of this user
Mhm.
idea or Gilliland's identity, and then allows me to log in to other places. And so
Yep.
I think there's kind of there is an attempt to sort of build out that,
Mhm.
and I think Passport was a failed attempt at that. But
Yep.
I think Azure AD is probably a more mature, better option for
Absolutely.
companies. And so whether it's Azure AD or Okta or
Mhm.
the new auth kind of open source model that allows you to have your own identity,
Mhm.
I think at some point it becomes necessary.
Yep.
I don't. I think we're at least a decade, at
Okay.
least away from it.
Yeah. I think
Um,
the challenge
because
is always gonna be who maintains the root of trust is always
who has the root? Is it
yeah,
Microsoft? Is it Okta? Is it Google? Is it
yeah,
Facebook? And then how trusted is that identity if you're Goldman Sachs or
yeah.
you're Santander Bank?
Yeah. Do
Am I
you
going to
come in at
trust
the
it
same
really
level?
you?
Yeah. Do
Yeah.
you come in at the same level, or do you need to level up providing more security controls depending on the type of data you're accessing?
Yeah,
So
and maybe
mm,
Joe, what happens
mm,
is you bring sort of your base Art Gilliland
yeah.
identity, and then you get re-verified at your place of
Yep.
work,
Mhm.
and then you add on privileges that you have to do a second factor
Yeah.
for
Which is
once you
what
get there.
which is what happens here in Estonia. That's
Yeah,
exactly if you log into the bank and you want to, let's say,
right.
move across to the tax authority system using that same login, you might have to level up depending on what you're accessing. If it's just
Yeah,
view, it might be okay, but if you want to change something, you'll have to provide more security controls. So,
yeah. And I think what we're going to need is
mhm,
just stronger levels of escalation and
yeah,
open source around that. Whether it's maybe it's SAML two, maybe it's
mhm,
OAuth, whatever standards that we can do, because otherwise you can't do single sign on across entities
yeah,
because there has to be some credential pass.
yeah. There has to be some
Otherwise,
type of
you're
authentication
logging in again.
exchange. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're doing it again. And look, I think OAuth is probably a good one. I think
Mhm,
SAML two maybe
yeah.
because it lets you see levels of authorization, so it's not just on
So,
off. Again, we'll see.
yeah. So absolutely. So I want to move to my next prediction. My next
Yeah,
prediction is around hacking esports. I find it really interesting. We've seen a lot of the gamification of hacking
yeah,
turning into. There's a lot of gamification platforms where you
yeah.
can actually go and you can do capture the flag events. You can do educational learning.
Right.
I think it's a great way for people who want to get into the industry to ramp up their skills and to learn new techniques. But what's really happening, I think it was around the past year I attended a couple of events, and one I attended earlier this year was KernelCon, which was for me was amazing because what they really did was they really launched the idea of hacking esports. That you will spend, I sat for probably a day watching the likes of John Hammond and Joe Grant
Yeah,
and others and friends, basically just hacking and watching them hacking. and of course, it was in a gaming, gamification style.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on this becoming a esports world? Actually, people, just like you have UFC, Ultra, Fighting Champion, and other boxing.
Yeah.
Do you think that in the near future this will become, just like gaming has with streaming, will become an
I mean, look,
esport?
I have 15-year-old twins, and it's amazing to me
Mm,
how long they'll sit on YouTube and watch someone else play video games.
yeah.
And it's changed a little bit now, but when my son was like 10, like
Mhm.
holy cow, I think he could spend hours watching somebody else play a video game. Uh, it's possible. Look,
Mm.
I can't think of anything more boring. They're going to have to find a way to sex it up a bit to make it really interesting to watch.
Mm.
But I have hosted and participated in capture the flag kinds of
Mhm.
events and sort of war gamey kinds of things or
Yeah.
hackathons. Um, and and it's inevitable that people that are excellent at that uh, aren't
Mhm.
going to be sort of glorified, right? And so there
Yeah.
are some sort of big names out there, people that they would just love to watch them work and watch them go.
Mhm.
I think there's the technical aspect of it, but as you know, I mean, a lot of like really high quality hackers are just great social engineers, and they
Yeah.
just are good at managing human nature. And so, if you can find a way
Mhm.
to sort of create a game around that and create some sort of excitement, tension that people will want to watch, I think it's such a big part of society now. I think it's inevitable
Mhm.
that they'll find a way to sort of turn it into, you know, we watch The Bachelor, we watch
Yeah.
Survivor. We're going to watch, some sort of hacking for live hacking, where
Mm.
the geeks inherit the earth, and we're starting to make multimillionaires out of television personalities that are hacking for a living.
Absolutely. I've started, even myself, I follow quite a few of them just to kind of keep my skills fresh, and I'm watching and learning. And I find
Yeah,
it fascinating. I think the one, watching Joe Grant, who we know
yeah,
for years, that
yeah.
just watching him doing hardware hacking and just kind of his thought process and seeing what he was doing was so fascinating.
Which
So for
what I
me,
think is
yeah,
so amazing about these folks is they just understand how the system works so well
yeah,
that they can identify the potential places for
hmm,
risk, just because they're so deep in how the process works.
yeah,
And look, I mean, these folks are geniuses in general,
hmm,
and their knowledge of a domain, a specific domain. Even the 15 and 18-year olds, that they're just the depth of their knowledge of how
yeah,
networking works, or how these hardware systems work, or how just software works in general
hmm.
is truly extraordinary. And so I think from that perspective, uh, there'll be people like you and me that are geeks for the space and love it, that that are like just
Absolutely,
overly impressed with them because of just how extraordinary they are.
yeah,
But I also, they'll it's possible. I
hmm.
don't think I'm going to be watching it on ESPN, but maybe.
You might be surprised. So,
Look, maybe. It's
so
amazing to me that people will watch, the Secret Singer, or whatever that crazy show is, where you get famous
mm,
singers that put these big stupid costumes on,
yeah, I
but
mean
people
that's
watch it.
been people. It's been popular here in Estonia. People's watching it, so and I can relate. My son as well. He will watch hours of just watching others playing Minecraft or other
Yeah,
games,
exactly,
and it's just
exactly.
fascinating. One of the next predictions I've got as well is around zero trust. We've seen a lot of, from the executive order, we've seen a lot of emphasis in it. And I think everyone has different opinions of what zero trust is.
Yeah,
And for me, one thing it kind of it's for I've kind of it's not something that somebody can just simply install a piece of software that says zero trust and you're done. It's not something that you simply check off or you're finished with. And I was at EIC a few months ago, and I listened to Brian from Yahoo, and he mentioned the best term that I was just sitting back. I was doing a QA, and he said zero trust. It's basically it's a mindset and how you wish to operate your business. It's
yeah,
something you go on that journey. It's how you practice security. It's not that you put
that's right.
it in place as a control. It's how you practice it. What's your thoughts around? I think zero trust will become a more focused topic in 2022. But what's your thoughts around that area?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think zero trust is going to become a security norm, just like
Mm-hmm.
defense in depth became a security norm. And it'll mean a bunch of different things for the companies. But I would agree. I would agree with Brian that look,
Hmm.
what it is it's a way of uh, having your environment work. It's a way
Hmm.
of sort
Yeah.
of believing and sort of philosophy of what you want to try to do. And it's an embracing of essentially least privilege. This
Yeah.
idea that you want people to have access to what they deserve to have access
Hmm.
to and nothing more.
Yeah. So
And so I
baseline,
think,
where your starting point.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that the trick for all of this is how do you make that as seamless as
Hmm.
possible? How do you make it a curated experience for your employee to say, okay, welcome in the front door, Mr. Employee, after you've said who you are, and then the hallways that you're allowed to go down and the rooms you're allowed to go in are just open for you, and it feels like you have freedom to move
Hmm.
around, but your environment is curated.
Yeah.
And then if somebody different comes in, their environment and the same sort of structure is
Hmm.
just different. They have a different pathway and different rooms they
Yeah.
can go in because of their rights. But you have to be able to make it that seamless
Hmm.
over time. I think that's the
Yeah.
directional vision.
So how
Um,
you automate as much as you possibly can.
yeah, and how do you know
Yeah.
what those pathways should be? I think the biggest challenge is, we've had
Hmm.
this sort of rules-based access. We've had a lot of these theories before, but wow, are they clunky?
Yeah.
And so, as an employee, you come in and, okay, I'm a new employee. I'm the CEO. What should I have
Hmm.
access to? Well, should I have access to everything? Probably not.
Not.
There's a whole bunch of stuff I never need to see.
Yeah.
Why would I ever have access to a data center?
Hmm.
I don't do anything in the data center except for visit, and for that, I could actually be walked in
Yeah.
by someone who
Someone
stands with
can.
me and
Yeah.
leads me out. Otherwise, my badge should just never open that door.
So it reminds me.
Uh,
It reminds me years ago. We talked about, from when it was kind of really the boom of virtualization side, and we went from persistent machines to non-persistent machines, which then you had and the way I see from a
right.
from a privilege perspective and zero trust, and I wrote the book of the least privileged cybersecurity for dummies, which has been a great
Yeah.
book. For me, it was
Yeah.
about moving from persistent privilege to
Zero
non-persistent
standing.
privilege,
Yeah.
zero standing privilege, where you do
Yeah.
just in time,
Absolutely.
on demand.
Well, and that
Um,
way, if you steal
yeah,
my account for some reason, you trick me into giving you my
yeah,
password, you don't get access to all the things
nope,
that I have. You might get access to the basic stuff, but the
correct.
really important things, I only get access, I only get privilege for that, or I
Hmm.
only get authorization for it at that time and in certain circumstances. And I think that kind of environmental,
Hmm.
that again, more deeper embracing of least privilege.
Yep,
I think that's going to be the maturity curve that people go
yep.
down. You start with sort of, okay, let's do two-factor, which
Mhm.
is kind of table stakes
Wh-
now.
which
uh,
is what, it's the whole point. I think is that you
yeah,
implement security controls that have zero trust enablers. That's
yeah,
really what we're thinking about. That's kind of
I
when
think
you're
so.
thinking about putting in a process or policy in place. It's about things that help you put those controls that give you enable a zero trust posture
Yeah.
on that specific challenge. And this
I
moves
think
you.
what's so difficult about
Yeah,
it, though,
yeah,
Joe, is every vendor in the security space has named their product zero trust something.
yeah.
And it's
It's.
because all of the surveys tell us that, not 70 to 80% of companies have budget
Mhm.
for it, and the education about what it is so spotty
Yeah.
that companies and executives that are focused on manufacturing or focused
Mhm.
on building cars or focused on, they don't they're not going to educate themselves on zero trust, and so they're looking for check boxes. They're looking for
Yeah.
sort of hit it, they just want to, I want to make sure I do zero trust. Okay, zero
Mhm.
trust is the law of the
The
land. I'm going to do
mandate.
zero trust. Make sure I buy some of that.
Yeah. So,
um,
for the audience listening in this, I definitely recommend if you go back a few episodes to episode 39 and listen to the Zero Trust Fundamentals with Dave Lewis.
yeah,
It was a really fun episode.
yeah, it
I
was a good
definitely
one.
recommend to go back and
That was a
listen
good
to
one.
that one. One thing I've got, the last thing before we kind of finish up and do a summary is, what's your thoughts around cryptocurrencies side of things? I have a prediction that we're going to see regulation in the near future because
Yeah.
We're also seeing the EU coming up with the EU digital currency as well, which really, I believe that cryptocurrencies will be the future, but
Yeah.
you have to have some type of regulatory kind of controls over them. So
Look,
what's your thoughts around that?
I think governments are running scared from cryptocurrencies at the
Yeah.
moment because you lose control of your monetary policy,
Yeah.
and so it is inevitable that we are going to see regulatory uh,
Hmm.
pressure because governments are losing their quote unquote financial sovereignty
Yeah.
based on the rise of this and the fact that you can transact a lot of it. And so I
Hmm.
think we're in for a bit of a rocky uh,
Hmm.
road in that. I think they are inevitable.
Yeah.
And it's what I personally love about them is that it's a great equalizer across, and to not have to do
Hmm.
translation when I'm in France or in Estonia or
Yeah.
the US or Denmark or all these places that have different currencies. Um, like being able to standardize on that again
Hmm.
makes the world more connected,
Yep.
and I think that's a very positive thing. But I know it scares the heck out of individual
Yeah.
governments that are going to lose sovereignty over their own monetary policy, and so I think there's a lot more. There's going to be a lot more regulatory pressure. I think it's inevitable that it will
Hmm.
be regulated at some point. What I would hate to see is, government-owned currencies like the
Yeah.
EU digital currency. I think that will not be awesome. That we already have that. It's called a euro and it's
I,
called a
for
dollar.
me, for me, when I travel, the currency, I don't have to handle cash anymore. I haven't had to handle cash in years. I've already
Yeah,
already have it in my pocket.
I,
So,
yeah.
what's the difference
Exactly.
other than anonymous transactions?
It's
What's
anonymous. I mean, I think that also has its downfall
Mhm.
because it can be there. There's a bunch of other challenges that come with that. But
Yeah.
I think the reality is I've been using digital currency. I would prefer to pay with my phone or my watch or my credit card. I do
Mhm.
carry cash, but literally I take it out. I put $100 in my wallet and it sits there forever. And so it's especially now with COVID, where all the restaurants and locations are going cashless. They don't even want to touch your money.
Yes,
Uh,
it's a health risk these
it's
days.
a health risk now, apparently. And so digital
Mhm.
currencies can save us from COVID, apparently.
Yeah.
So I think, look, we're gonna. I think it's inevitable. I think
Mhm.
regulatory pressure is inevitable, and so we just need to move to embrace it. And it's the digital currencies that back something
Mhm.
meaningful, like helium or
Yeah.
Ethereum. They back something actually meaningful. I think that is
There's a
uh,
tangible asset, kind of value there,
yeah, there's a
rather than
tangible
just
good that it's
yeah,
creating, and
yeah.
I think that those kinds of it's better than some of these meme coin
Mhm.
kinds of things that are just
Yeah.
silliness, speculative silliness. But I
I
think
guess
there
I
are
guess
some
we're
good
gonna leave NFTs to another conversation then.
reasons.
So,
Yeah,
but it's been Art. It's been a pleasure having you on. Any final thoughts you would like to share with the audience before we kind of wrap it up today? And
yeah.
any thoughts you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Look, thank you, one, for having me on, Joe. I think it's been a pleasure talking to you. I always enjoy it. I think the conversations are smart and interesting. So thank you for that.
It's been a pleasure.
And look, as we go off into this next sort of phase of work, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with not only the cyber crime part
Mhm.
of it and the fact that we're sort of just digital and out there now and interacting across boundaries with really no perimeters around us,
Yeah.
which I think drives more value for the kinds of technologies that focus on identity and information security. But I also think just the cultural aspect of not
Mhm.
being together in offices and how we change the way that we build relationships at work, I think is going to be significant. I mean, forget the whole security part of it.
Yeah.
That
Mhm.
piece at the beginning talking about how do you build culture when new people come in, how do you build that company connection, uh, is going to be radically different. How do we
Mhm.
change the way we recognize skill and delivery and provide promotions? Because it really goes counter to human nature, where you kind of create a tribe, you know those
Mhm.
people, you promote the people you know
Yeah,
that execute well, and there's a level of trust. I think there's a whole bunch of new management skill sets that need to be learned because of COVID and because of the way we're
absolutely.
working now, which I think is kind of a new horizon for us as well. So,
Absolutely. I'm excited for the future ahead. So it's definitely
same.
it's an exciting time for sure.
It's an
Uh,
exciting time, and there's
yeah.
lots of learning. So,
Absolutely. So, Art, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully, this won't be the last time you'll be on the show. Hopefully,
I
we'll
would be
get you on
happy to come
again
back, Joe.
in
Thank
the
you.
future. So, for the audience, again, many thanks for staying with us throughout this episode. Right, we're really taking just a look back on the last year, what's changed, what's been happening, and just giving you a little bit of outlook on some of the predictions and where we see some of the trends going. So, Art, it's been fantastic. Thank you for joining me on the show. And for the
Oh,
audience,
my pleasure.
tune in every 2 weeks, subscribe, go back and listen to previous episodes. I definitely recommend the Zero Trust Fundamentals. That was definitely a fun one. Stay safe, and I will see you soon and speak to you soon. All the best
Cheers,
for what I
everyone.
said tonight. Bye.